Evening and welcome to tonight's session, the Q&A session for the first one in this summer, which is very exciting that we've got into the summer months. My name is Bridget Barry and I coordinate Farming for Nature. Farming for Nature is a national organisation that was set up to inspire and encourage farmers that farm or wish to farm more for nature. One of the ways we do this is each year we get together a group of exemplary farmers that are doing great things for nature, and they become our ambassadors. And this Q&A session is a way of hearing about from these ambassadors about their farming practices and what works on their farm and also what doesn't work. So what we'll do over the next hour is I'll kickstart the event and I'll ask our guest speakers some questions. And then if you have any questions, there's a chat box on the banner. So just type in your questions there and we'll facilitate them later. If you miss any of the previous sessions, or if you have to leave early tonight, or you know someone who is unable to join, this session will be up on our YouTube channel, Farming for Nature YouTube channel, within the next 24 hours. So feel free to watch or listen to this session or any of the other sessions if you miss any of it. So on to tonight's session. We are delighted to welcome two people because we're having an unusual session tonight. It's actually an organisation. It's the Irish Seed Savers Association, which is a farm in East Clare. And tonight we have two of their employees. We have Damien Regan and Jeremy Turkington, who both work for the Irish Seed Savers. Jeremy is the garden manager. Damien is the garden manager and Jeremy is the orchard manager. Irish Seed Savers is the national seed bank and grower, and it's based on a 20-acre farm near Scariff in County Clare. So welcome and thanks for joining us tonight, guys. As I mentioned, this is a slightly different session in that this ambassadorship is actually an organization. So you might just start with telling me about the background to Irish Seed Savers, why it was set up and what its kind of goals are.
Hi everyone. Yeah, Irish Seed Savers it was its 30-year anniversary last year in 2021. It was set up in 1991 by a woman called Anita Hayes and her husband Tommy Hayes. Anita was American. She had witnessed sort of declines in biodiversity in America, and she moved to Ireland with her husband Tommy. And they first set up Seed Savers in Carlow in 1991, and they were there for 5 years. And Anita, was the visionary. She kind of set about the mission of sourcing heritage Irish crops and apple trees at the time. And then she moved to East Clare. She moved to Scariff in 95 and set up here in Caparo in a cottage. And it was really just one field in her back garden that she started growing these and saving these seeds. And she got in touch with those two kind of key people in the apple side of things. It was Father McNeice in Armagh. He set up the Armagh Orchard Trust with his mum Annie, and they were doing a similar thing in the north, going around and saving old apple varieties. And then I suppose the most influential person was Dr. Keith Lamb. He did his doctorate thesis on heritage apples in the 50s, and he listed all the old varieties in that thesis. So that was kind of the blueprint that she had to go around and try and save all these old varieties. And luckily Keith was still alive at the time, and she managed to actually source a lot of the trees from the original farms and where he had collected them. He had when he was doing his thesis created an orchard in Rosemount in the UCD in Dublin, but unfortunately that was cleared by the Dublin Corporation. But luckily she managed to source some of those trees back from Brogdale in England and Kent. So that was kind of the start of the heritage fruit tree collection. And really she managed to get most of Keith Lamb's ones that he had documented. There's still maybe 15 or so that haven't been found, but they're still showing up. In 2016 we found one in a private collection in America, Sweet William, so they're still there to be found. And we're also, I'll talk a bit later about the genetic work we've been doing since 2014 to identify trees that are genetically unique to Ireland and ones that we have to conserve that aren't being conserved anywhere else. And I know Damien will talk to you a bit about similar projects that they're doing with the seeds. So we've moved from those kind of humble beginnings to the site here now. We're now 20 acres. So it's expanded from the 2 acres that Anita started with. And now we employ 26 staff. We're one of East Clare's biggest employers. And a lot of our sales now, they're online. I suppose now there's 3 main income streams. The supporterships is one, which is very important. Our members are kind of the lifeblood of the whole organization. And we generate an income from the sales of our trees and our seeds. And we're also funded by DAFM, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, to conserve. The government has an obligation to conserve anything that is genetically unique to Ireland. So they fund us to conserve anything that we've proven to be genetically unique to Ireland, and we have a memorandum of agreement with them, and we agree KPIs every year, and then they come and they audit our key performance indicators and make sure that we've done everything, and it's a good working relationship with them, and it works well.
Great. So before we get into kind of the heritage crops and the seeds, perhaps you can just explain to me so for those of us who haven't been to the farm, what it actually looks like at the moment. You know, what might we see, what's in bloom at the moment, but also how is the farm split up? How does it function at the moment?
Well, like I said, it has been added on over the years. So I suppose it's still quite divided up in a sense. Like we've got woodlands, we've got, I suppose, 7 acres of orchards, and then we have the gardens in between all that. So there's a lot of diverse kind of tapestry of habitats on the farm. There's a lot of hedgerows, there's woodlands, the orchards are kind of well interspersed around the site. Some are in different aspects, like we have a self-rooting orchard that's on a north face because they generally can tolerate a bit of harsher climate, and they can take that, I suppose they can tolerate the wetter climate. What else? A lot of
well, in the garden side of things, the site is 20 acres, but we're actually only cultivating about 1 acre of vegetables. But that seems like very little, but we have to be really careful, I suppose, with disease and just general management and maintenance of those because they're for seed. So it's quite labor intensive. So at the moment, we'd have a lot of crops still in the polytunnels that would have overwintered. Some of them are in their 2nd year. Things like chards, celeria, leeks, some lettuce, and then some radishes and some turnips that are about 6 or 7 foot tall at the moment, with just incredible looking plants. You don't often see brassicas at that stage of their life, but they look more like rapeseed plants or something at the moment. The radishes, about 7 foot tall with a kind of white flower with a slight pink tinge to it. And then we're just starting to prepare. We planted all our tomatoes in today, and we'll be preparing ground soon for sort of our root crops for their 1st year of growth. And so there's some things that look kind of regular that you'd see on a regular farm. There's some things that look a bit unusual. I suppose one thing is our spacings are quite unusual. That would be something that would stand out to a market gardener or kind of a hobby gardener. We plant things quite far apart typically because they're in the ground for a long time and they're going into that 2nd stage of their life. So in the west of Ireland, the dampness and humidity and everything is a big concern. So it does look quite unusual. Yeah, like we'd be planting radishes about 30 to 40 centimeters apart.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, Damien, you're growing not for the vegetables, but you're growing for the seed. You're growing are these heritage vegetables? Are these kind of are these leeks? You kind of know where the lineage has come from, or?
So we do kind of a combination of heritage crops, and then we do also just some crops that we've kind of acclimatized to the area. So we are, like Jeremy was saying, we get funding from the Department of Agriculture just for the heritage crops. But then like we have, we sell seed, and we maintain a lot of different varieties that have been grown here for years. So we're doing 3 different varieties, actually possibly 4, of tomatoes this year. So we don't receive any funding, say, for those, for example. But so yeah, and it's a mix of heritage crops, and like then sometimes we kind of, even this year, thinking we're doing some oca. We just want to try and grow it on a bit, and we're kind of considering doing some yacon, but I said that'll be next year. So it's that combination of crops that are suited to the Irish climate and testing them out and acclimatizing them to the local climate, and heritage crops.
And so, and then the seeds that you're also developing, I don't know if that's the right word, like, are they open pollinated, or is it cross pollinated, like, and then are you, what kind of seeds are you collecting? Is it just vegetables? Or, I mean, if I have a tillage farmer listening tonight, I mean, do you kind of do seeds, obviously not at that level but of space, but kind of what type of seeds would you have available for people to grow?
So we do some like grains, and we just sowed some oats there recently. We will be doing some flax and some wheat, but small quantities. So typically then if somebody's interested in it, like they can buy a small quantity from us, but then they'd be growing it out if they wanted to bulk it up. And then, yeah, everything's open pollinated. So we have to be very careful with different families are different. So like we have 2 broad beans on site because the site's big enough that we can safely plant them far enough apart that we're not concerned with cross-pollination. But then, say in the brassicas family, like we have a purple sprouting broccoli now that's in flower, so we can't have another Brassica soleraceae on site, which would be, we can have it in its first year, but we can't have it in the second year. So we can't have a cabbage or a kale or another broccoli or cauliflower or anything like that. So that side of it takes a lot of planning, and you just need to be cautious, and you kind of need to know the vegetables.
So I'd say there's a lot of challenges involved in growing heritage seeds. And I mean, the question would be why? Is it really important to kind of our society that we maintain these heritage seeds? Sorry if I'm asking an obvious question, but
no, so I suppose the heritage seeds, like, we got a story there. Somebody got in touch with us recently from Mayo. We had a common cabbage from Mayo, and it was a man from up near Ballinrobe who got in touch saying that he thinks that cabbage actually came from his family, that it was his father and his grandfather and great grandfather that had been breeding this cabbage variety, and they'd been communicating with all the neighbors and everything that nobody else had let their cabbage go to flower. And so, like, I suppose the heritage crops they're kind of invaluable to us in Ireland because they've been acclimatized to Ireland. And like, even when you listen to talks from seed breeders, like there's a lot of places where like they'll even start to kind of select and breed a variety to suit their location. And that's kind of already been done in these heritage varieties, and they've really been like tried and tested. Like, I guess that's what heritage essentially means, like in the sense of been around in this climate for so long. And then in terms of the value of doing it, like if you have an open pollinated heritage variety, like you can save seed from that and grow it on year. Like you're never having to go and buy the seed again if you're kind of organized and I suppose a bit educated in what you're doing. Whereas, like, we saw with Brexit and with COVID, like growers were struggling to get seed. So I think, it would be interesting to look at possibility of farmers working together in maybe 5 or 6 farms together, and that communication of, okay, I'll do this brassicas this year, maybe you do that one. And they could be self-sufficient in seed. So
So for you in the scale you're doing, what is the process of your seed collecting and then distribution? What, like, how do you do it?
So for some things, like we're even say like tomatoes, they produce a lot of seed. Like we put in about 20 plants of bush variety today, and like we probably won't really need all the seeds off those. We'll see how the plants go. We just kind of put it in really because we had a bit of extra space. But so like that's kind of crazy to think that as a seed producer that 20 plants of tomato is actually almost
At your capacity.
a certain variety.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the collecting, like it's all different. It's different for every single plant. Like say peas, for example, it's kind of the same as if you're harvesting them for market, where you go along and you harvest the pea as it's ready. We're doing that exact same thing, but just a little bit later. So we're looking for the more mature kind of dried out pea, and we're just harvesting it by hand. And then we do have some machinery here on site, like threshers. A lot of the machinery we got from the old sugar beet factories. So we have some threshers and carpet cleaners and different machines that we kind of can use to make the processing of the seed a bit easier. And some other machines then for cleaning the seed, just to remove the chaff and any kind of excess bits of material, especially that could be holding on to bits of moisture. And then we have a dryer here on site, so that's great to have that, and that we're able to dry the seed out sufficiently that it can be stored for years. So yeah, it's kind of different for every crop. It was the same as like on a market garden, you harvest every crop differently. It's essentially, there's as much variation in how you harvest and process the seed of each crop.
Yeah, fair enough. So presumably soil is really important to your product. What do you do to improve it? Or
So we make compost here on site from waste material. So we'd have a lot of brown material coming out of the seed bank in the autumn from the processing, like a lot of the material will have dried out. So we have that, and then we have just general plant waste, and so we make compost throughout the year. So then we add that to our beds. We also have the prunings of the apple trees, which we chip. So we've got that wood chip. So then we compost that as well. And then we also get farmyard manure from a local farmer. So we're just quite careful about how we make sure we turn that a few times in the year. And, you know, we try and have it, you know, use it a year after we initially get it, so that it's out of that composted stage. And then we try to combine all those materials so that we're not just using one of them. And Tristan, the managing the gardens there for the last couple of years, he was doing biodynamic preparations as well for our compost. So it's the combination of those things, and then we use green manures a lot. So we actually, one of the tomato beds we were planting today, like we had sowed green manures in them about a month ago. Because we don't have that same intensity that a market garden has, we're kind of able over the winter we kind of composted our beds, and then we covered them, and then we took off the covers in, and we actually, some of them, the material was a bit dry on the surface, so we had to dig them over, but then we sowed a green manure, and then it was amazing today. We sow a lot of phacelia and buckwheat in the tunnels, and I think they were sown about a month, and then today we just removed the material. It was quite a quick thing to remove it, like none of the roots seemed too strong. But when we were planting the tomatoes, it was phenomenal to see just the root structures in the bed, the life and the activity in the soil. So yeah, it's those combination of keeping the beds covered, keeping living roots in them, and good compost.
Great, excellent. So just moving across to the kind of orchard and the apple trees there, Jeremy, how many, sorry, I was going to say species, that's the wrong word. How many different types, breeds of apple trees would you have on site?
Currently have 180, like that is known to be genetically unique to Ireland. We did an interesting project in 2014 where we were able to DNA profile the whole Irish heritage collection. We had a baseline that we were able to compare with the UK collection and the European collection, and then with that data we were able to kind of discern what is genetically unique to Ireland, and then that sort of informed how we managed our orchards. Any duplicate varieties we had with nearly 1,000 trees on site at that time. Over the years, we were collecting trees all the time just to conserve them, really, or preserve them. We were going out, and if there was a tree under threat, we would just propagate it and we would plant it in the orchards. We try and identify it using phenotypes, but we ended up like we just had so many trees. So the DNA work that we did allowed us to really narrow down our sort of conservation strategy for each variety. So now we have 180 known cultivars that are genetically unique to Ireland and that we're really trying to conserve here on site. We had quite a few duplicates with the UK collection, so like we would have, and like it goes down to a few years, like maybe you would have, I suppose, an example, Glenstall Cooker, for example, it was registered in the UK maybe 3 years before it was registered in Ireland, and it was Judeny's seedling in the UK, so that's then the name that it took. But because of that, then that variety is being conserved in Brogdale in the UK collection, so it's not really a conservation concern for us. So we don't really, it's not really something that we prioritizing as a conservation variety, you know.
So of these 150 or so, do you propagate X amount every year? Like, do you?
Yeah, so there's 180, and we're still finding unique varieties as well. Like I think currently we're DNA testing old orchards all along the west coast. A lot of old Anglo-Irish estates still have old orchards, and a lot of kind of monastic sites or ecclesiastical centres still old orchards there. So we've received funding to DNA test. We're aiming for 420 samples this summer, and we're hoping to do the same again next summer. So we're testing trees in Bantry House, in Birr Castle, in Dunsany Castle. We have a good few old orchards on the west coast that haven't been tested, so we're testing all those. We have an abandoned famine village in West Clare, at Caher Bridge. There's 2 old varieties found there. It was an amazing thing to see that the village is thatch had all gone, but the whole village was just covered in hazel scrub. You wouldn't even know it was there. Only we were brought up there, and there's 2 really old apple trees in there. So there's still things out there that are unique to Ireland and that need to be conserved. It's just finding them or get them brought to our attention.
It's lovely because, like you say, there's loads of kind of the cultural history behind it all and the cultural heritage, that you're also preserving. I mean, can you say where the oldest orchard is in Ireland? I mean, that you guys know of, or is that?
Well,
do apple trees only last X amount, like 300 years or 400 years?
Yeah, well, there's a phenomenon in Ireland called self-rooting. So those trees, they're kind of infinitely renewable because they'll hit damp earth and they'll grow again. And there's a lot of genetic wisdom in those trees because you find them mostly on the western seaboard counties. And it's just a phenomenon that's kind of unique to this temperate Atlantic climate where it's so wet that they form kind of root nodules on their bark, and then whenever if they blow over or they hit damp earth at all, they'll just reroot and they'll grow again. So a lot of those varieties, they never really, like, we'll get old, but we'll lose our sunshininess, but if they fall over, they'll just renew themselves and go again. So there's ancient trees in Ireland still like that could be hundreds and hundreds of years old. But what we're looking really pre-1900s, because a lot of the English varieties or UK varieties were brought in then, and it was kind of the policy was that there was a belief that the heritage varieties were no longer of any use. So farmers were really encouraged to take out their orchards and replace them, which is why we're really targeting the west of Ireland now, because a lot of those, there's a Franciscan monastery on Achill Island, there's 13 old trees there. Those they didn't really take any notice of things like that, so that's where there's still
God, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because like you say,
Fascinating.
kind of the more the landowners, you kind of associate orchards with wall gardens, and maybe they're good growing areas
Yeah.
near the big houses or something. But actually, that's incredible about the Western Seaboard heritage
Yeah,
trees.
well, a lot of the trees that we've DNA tested and are unique, they aren't in orchards, like, because they weren't part of planting schemes. It's old trees behind cottages, it's old trees in people, single trees in people's gardens. Like, that's where we're really finding things that are unique. A lot of the planting schemes, they were kind of orchestrated and planned out, but a lot of the varieties would have been known varieties, you know.
It also might give people solace listening tonight that like you can grow an apple tree anywhere. If you can grow it in
Yeah,
Apple Island, like do you know
exactly.
what I
If you
mean?
can get exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
If you can get, now it isn't a wall garden in Achill Island, but even at that,
Yeah.
and the one in Cahir, like, it's right at near Fanor Beach, like,
Yeah.
it's just inland, like, and they're old trees, like, they've been able to
With
survive.
not much soil either in Cahir Bridge.
It's actually growing out of a wall in the limestone. It's in a
Amazing.
stone wall, so it's just basically rooted down a crack in the limestone, which is incredible.
And on that, do you find your trees are better suited to certain soil types, or?
Well, it largely depends on what rootstock we graft them onto, but the self-rooting varieties, that's why they were used in Ireland, because they can grow in more marginal upland soil, or they can tolerate more acidic soils. So that's why they were used as a food crop, especially on the west and in the uplands. It really depends now on what rootstock you choose, as to the soil type or what it would really tolerate, you know.
Presumably pollinators are important to both of you, but we're just sticking with the trees for the moment. Like, how do you encourage pollinators on the farm?
Well, we have a really diverse range of habitats. We have a lot of broadleaf woodland, which gives us a huge amount of different pollen at different times. And the site was very well planned at the start in regards to its hedgerows and what woodland was planted. There was no woodlands here, but they made a real effort to source local genetic provenance trees, native trees. So they're all in sync with kind of the local ecosystem and the needs of pollinators. So there's a lot of habitat, and we're also doing a project with the native Irish black bee where we're creating further habitat. We're putting up log hives. We have two national hives on site we sourced them. They're the native Irish black bee, that they were queen rears from a breeder in Cork. But we've tried to move away from that type of thinking, and we've got two transition hives, so we're going to put those two national hives in, move the frames into a huge log hive, and we're just really going to take a more hands-off approach, and we're putting up log hives and trees as well to attract sort of local swarms into those as well. So that's an interesting pollinator project we have. The ponds as well. We have we're involved in the Hare's Corner project, which was piloted in Clare through the Burren Bio Trust, and we used that to dig a pond this year. But it's fascinating that there's a lot of pollinators that are associated with water in Ireland. So see a lot of dragonflies, damselflies, and they'll all pollinate as well. But it's mostly honeybees and bumblebees bumblebees especially, that really pollinate a lot of our apple crops and a lot of our open pollinated vegetables as well. Damien mentioned the brassicas earlier, that they're mad flowers, huge yellow flowers, but the amount of bees on those flowers is just incredible. When you're walking past them, you can hear them before you see them at the minute.
Do you know, and last year, like, there was particularly bad winds at this time of the year, I seem to remember, and like and some apple growers were saying to me, therefore their crops were really bad in the autumn time. Have you found, how resilient are you against any kind of, I suppose, environmental impacts like that?
And I suppose that's the importance of genetic diversity within the heritage collection. Like, you'll have a complete suite of flowering times. We'll have flowering times even from the end of February right through into the start of June. So if there's a late frost or any frost in between, then sometimes, like last year, for example, we had 10 days of late frost from the 8th of May to the 18th of May. but that you'd expect the later flowering varieties to escape the frost, but actually it was the varieties that had set fruit earlier in the year that actually escaped a lot of the frost. And on this side as well, like it's so diverse, we're on drumlins here, so you get across the site, it's like a long narrow strip to 20 acres, so across the site you get little microclimates and soil temperatures and frost pockets all across the site. So it's a complex site, so
varies. And
varies,
before
yeah.
if anyone has any question for the guys, please put it in your chat box. I just have one or two questions before we move over to the chat box. So the Irish Seed Savers, they carry out a lot of education and events and workshops on the farm. How important is it to share the work that you guys do?
It's hugely important. I suppose we have three main departments within the organization. We'd have the gardens and the seed bank, and then we'd have an orchard department, and then a third department's the education department, and that's a huge part of our mission statement and what we do. We are involved with a lot of schools. We take out school tours. We do a lot of tours around what we do for different organizations. And then we have a whole range of weekend workshops and events. A lot of those we do bring people in to deliver a lot of those workshops from outside. There's a whole range of different ones, but a lot of them as well is in-house as well. Our staff will be delivering those as well. So it's kind of a vital part of what we do.
Fair enough. So there's a question here there from Kelly Sean, and this is probably for Damien. Damien, how many plants on average do you need for seed saving?
So it's different for different things. Like with self-pollinators, like the legumes and tomatoes, like you can save some seed at home with like a few tomato plants and kind of away you go. But then for essentially the crops that have more open flower, the outbreeders, you need about 100 typically, they say. If you have less than that, then you're going to get kind of inbreeding deficiency, and you're going to start getting problems, just weak plants in the next generation. So if you think of like 100 carrot plants gone to flower, it takes up a lot of space. So like I was saying before, for things like that, it makes more sense for farmers to work together, because it's not really too viable for a lot of people to sort of designate entire polytunnels to seed saving, especially if they're kind of starting out and they're not too sure, how well it's going to go. So yeah, I think the self-pollinating things is a good place to start, and then kind of take it from there. But yeah, the outbreeders, it's about 100.
So sorry, what's an outbreeder? Sorry.
So it'd be like essentially like a tomato plant. The flower is closed and the pollen just is staying within the flower, whereas something like a carrot, the flower is completely open, so the pollen is being transferred from one flower to another flower on another carrot. So it's yeah, you need it. I'm not sure there's like really complex maths behind it, but yeah, they say about 100 plants.
Okay. And then also from Kelly Sean, do you apply no-dig farming to the farm?
We try.
Perhaps explain to people what no-dig farming is, if you know. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no-dig farming is essentially not disturbing the soil. Suppose Charles Dowding would be one person who'd be very well known and kind of online for his no-dig approach. You need a lot of material if you're doing no-dig farming. You need a lot of material to add into the surface every year. You probably don't have that kind of quantity. And then also, if you're using stuff like farmyard manure and compost, you need to be sure that you're getting it up to the temperatures that you're killing off your weed seeds. Otherwise, you're going to probably have problems with weeds. So we don't have that material to bring in, and we kind of, I suppose, almost wonder like how eco-friendly that is to be bringing in that kind of quantity of material. And then we have a lot of soil thermometers. We monitor our temperature of our compost and our farmyard manure, but I mean, it's very difficult to get the whole pile up to that. You know, you get the center to that, but then you're mixing or you're turning the pile with the tractor, and not the whole pile is going to get to that temperature. It's pretty tricky. So we do try in certain places, like some of our legumes, we planted broad beans outside this year, sort of took a no-dig approach, but they actually were showing some signs of some problems related to compaction of the soil. We're on a very heavy clay soil here, so you have to be really careful with how we work it. But so yeah, kind of we try, I suppose, min-till. But we would, if we could get like our farming manure and get it well composted down and get all our materials really well composted down, it'd be nice to be doing a bit more no-dig.
And then on composting, Jeremy, do you put that around? And there's kind of two trains of thoughts of leave your trees alone or put compost around them. So what do you guys?
We within the orchards we have a farmer, and she keeps her cattle on straw, and she keeps her manure for a year, and then we get it as quite well composted down, but we would spread it quite not close to the base around in circles, but not much of it every year. It's just more for there's a lot of life within that. There's huge quantities of worms. It's just kind of to build the soil. But mostly what we would tend to use would be liquid seaweed and seaweed dust. And we use quite large quantities of that.
Would that be like vermi liquid, or like do you get it in a pack, or do you? Yeah. You don't make it yourself.
It's very hard to get the quantities, as Damien had said, to do this on the scale that we're working at. Now we do some comfrey teas, but most of what we use in the orchard, especially in the growing, the nursery side of things, it's brought in seaweed dust and liquid seaweed.
I'd say also like it's kind of nearly like working in a lab, less so for the trees, but more so for the seeds and like you have to be very careful of what you're bringing in. I mean, I think Damien said that already, but like
and we're organic we're certified organic as well, so everything has to be, when we're bringing things in, like it all has to be documented, and it has to be either we have to get a derogation for it, or just we have to keep a track of everything. So that in itself, the administration end of things can be quite challenging. So we'd prefer just to try and keep as much on site as possible, just using the materials that we have, as opposed to always trying to bring things in. Having said that, we do bring in quite a lot of, I bring in quite a lot of seaweed and liquid seaweed, just especially for the potted nursery, because it's kind of an totally artificial environment for the trees as well. So it's just the nature of trying to find the balance and conservation of what you're prepared to do, really. We do use no peat or peat-free compost, and with that we've had to kind of really adapt our mediums to get good quality trees. We just have to, suppose, work on our inputs.
So what's your biggest challenges for both of you? Like, what's your biggest, I suppose, like Monsanto on one side, and what's the biggest challenges for these conserving these breeds?
I suppose for time is a big challenge for a lot of conservation, because I know that's why we really had the push on this year to get funding to DNA test a lot of these old orchards. Some of the orchards are under threat from development. We've people contacting us saying, we've got planning permission, there's an old orchard here. Can you test it or propagate it? Or like, so that's and some of these trees are coming to, some of them are in decline. So it's a case of just trying to identify that they're unique to Ireland and conserve them. And that's really one of the biggest challenges that we have. Anything that's left that is unique to Ireland in the country, it's probably not being managed the best, and it could be under a lot of the trees that we're finding are under threat from agriculture, or intensive agriculture, or industrial agricultural practices. So that would be kind of a big threat, a challenge that we'd face in terms of conservation. Yeah, time would be I suppose the biggest challenge for us, for me.
And I suppose if people have any old trees on their land that, you know, old orchard trees, that they can contact you directly at like our seed savers.
Yeah,
like...
there was a scheme called fruitid.com, but actually with Brexit now, that's become like for a few years we were able to just kind of direct people to try and get the tree tested themselves, and let us know if it's unique, and then we would start investigating. But one with Brexit, that didn't really work because you needed all kinds of paperwork to even send plant material to get tested. And so that kind of, the stars aligned, and that culminated in, we just put a huge comprehensive kind of proposal into the genetic resource granted scheme to just test as many, over the next 3 years, test as many old trees as we can.
Okay.
One of the old trees that had already been brought to our attention that I mentioned earlier. So the first year we're going to test those, and then we're going to try and just compile a list of samples that we think are we need to sample, and then we can kind of work from there.
Okay. And then Damien, for you, what do you think is the biggest challenges in conserving kind of the heritage seeds?
Well, I suppose, like, I just actually started here last year, and before that I worked on an organic vegetable farm. And I think, to be honest, I think that the biggest challenge is almost on a certain level, like the lack of knowledge and the lack of seed saving in Ireland. You know, that like if you're working on a vegetable farm, you can go on farm walks to other farms, and you can kind of share information and, you know, get tips and bits of advice from seeing the way someone else does it. Whereas here, I think it's actually because organics food doesn't have the value that it essentially should have, that farmers and growers are, you know, they're being stretched to make a living from it, and therefore they don't have the time to put into like exploring, you know, saving seed and maybe even breeding new varieties and that kind of thing. So I think if people were getting a better price for their organic produce, and if we're getting better, you know, financial support maybe to farm, then there'd be more of a culture of seed saving. And I mean, there's, you know, phenomenal vegetable growers out there, and it'd be just amazing if there were more people saving seeds, and just that there'd be a network of it. And you know, it'd just be amazing to be able to go on farm walks and have a look to see how other people are approaching different challenges within seed saving.
So there's no kind of national network of seed savers, but where would you, if you want advice or if you want to troubleshoot thing, is there anything internationally? Is there any kind of online, I don't know, website, forum, network? So
we have some, like Tristan, who's worked here in previous years. So we've got some kind of like in-house knowledge. And then we do have like I suppose there is a small community of people saving seed. And, you know, it's not to that scale that there's lots of farm walks going on, but we do have, you know, some people that we can call on for like tips and advice. But
I was just thinking, for people listening to this, if they're thinking of going into seed saving or whatever, where would you suggest that they go for advice and support?
There's some good resources, like there's the John Navasio's book is excellent, and Carol Deppe is a really good person to look up and to have a look at some of her books and podcasts. I've been listening myself to the Open Source Seed Initiative podcasts, and they're mainly about breeding. It's an organization based in the US, but it's just amazing to hear people talking about breeding new varieties with no previous experience of seed saving, and kind of just taking it on themselves to sort of give it a go. But I think the standout thing in it is that I think that they're getting paid better for their vegetables, and therefore maybe they have a little bit more time than your average Irish grower to experiment.
Interesting.
Because, yeah, it does. I suppose there is a bit of trial and error, and a lot of people, they just don't have that time to kind of put into trying something that maybe isn't going to pay, I suppose, essentially.
Yeah, but there's benefits, huge benefits to it. Kelly Shauna said, how many veg varieties do you keep?
So I think we've about 60 crops this year. In previous years we've had more, but we're kind of trying to do larger numbers. like I was saying, like at least 100 of different things. So I think we've got about 60. But then, like, you know, some of the seed will keep for years, so we'd have more than 60 things in our catalogue. And then we also have seed guardians, so they're spread around the country. So say like last year we grew 3 varieties of parsnips, and then so we kept one of them then on site this year for its kind of second year growth. So that'll go to flower here on site. And then the other 2 varieties then are with 2 seed guardians of ours in other parts of the country. So they'll grow them on then, and they'll send on that seed to us. And we might, sometimes depending on the guardian, we might clean it a bit more when it comes back to us, and then we'll put it in our dryer then, and we'll have that again next year. So yeah, about 60 different varieties on site, but we've about 14 active seed guardians, and we've got seed to seed training. We've got 2 groups this year taking part in the seed to seed training, so they'll hopefully become future seed guardians. So
so can people sign up to that? Is that open to the public, or if they've already been booked out?
650. So that starts in the autumn. People
Okay.
keep an eye out. They can sign up in the autumn. This year's there's 4 sessions throughout the year, so we've already had, I think, is it 2 or 3 sessions, and then there'll be a couple more, and then yeah, it's sort of be a new intake of people.
Makes sense in the autumn, yeah. So people can look it up on the Irish Seed Savers website.
Yeah,
and
that'll
kind
be
of
there under our courses.
great. And what's the main disease and pests do you deal with?
A lot of fungal issues. I mean, Ireland is, yeah, it's damp enough in the west of Ireland, and so yeah, fungal issues are a big one. Like I said, the spacing being really important, and we're kind of always learning about, yeah, things look like they're very far apart, and then you think, oh, I could have given it another bit, especially when things go to flower. And then there's certain crops like you know, lettuces and things, like when a lettuce goes to flower. I don't know if people are familiar with what a lettuce looks like in flower, but the seed heads, they almost look like a dandelion. So there's just a great possibility there of capturing moisture. And so yeah, I'd say fungal issues are the main ones. They're just constantly.
And how do you deal with them? Or
constantly just keeping plants clean and healthy. So making sure that we're on top of water and just getting the water in just right. And then airflow, so making sure the plants are far enough apart, and then yeah, constantly removing materials. So like even the turnips, the radish that we have in the polytunnel this morning, we went through them and removed probably like the bottom sort of maybe bottom 6 leaves from each plant, just ones that are kind of dying off a bit, just for airflow.
Okay. And how about you, Jeremy? What's your biggest kind of pest and disease problem with the orchard?
I suppose canker is the main issue. Like, we don't use any sprays on our tree. The only spray we use is, as I said, liquid seaweed. We use it as a foliar spray throughout the year. So canker, but it's just routine canker pruning nearly all year round. Any sign of it, we just prune it out, and that's continually. But a lot of we have very high rainfall on our site, but a lot of the heritage varieties are really hardy and they're tolerant. Like, they grow really well and they've adapted to this temperate climate. So there's a few varieties that would suffer from canker, but the vast majority of them, they're really.
What does Cancun look like, or what is?
There's different types. There's bacterial canker and fungal canker, but it's unmistakable. Like, you'll see the leaf, the way to spot it usually is you'll see the leaves dying off the tip of the branches, and then you just use scar down, and it's like it's a discoloration. It's just a brown flaky discoloration, and we just prune that out, and then we burn it.
Okay.
And that's.
And if you leave it, will it get the whole tree?
No, not always. Like, most of the canker, you'd find it in the kind of exterior branches and the tips. Like, and if you keep pruning that, you never have a problem. You get a problem then if it got into the score of the center and the trunk. But we prune the trees to maintain, as Damien does also, to maintain good airflow throughout the site. And yeah, that's it. We just good hygiene and good airflow going through the site, like, and that kind of keeps it. And we also, with the feeding regime, with the trees well fed and has full nutrition and isn't stressed, generally it's able to tolerate canker.
Okay. I don't know if this is more of a question for Damien than you, but Mary Hoy has asked, how do you control slugs in particular?
Well, one way is we have started in the past few years introducing hedgehogs. Like we found a family of hedgehogs under plastic a few years ago when we laid plastic down, and they weren't doing so well, so we had to bring them to the wildlife rescue centre called Hodgeprickle in Broadford, quite close to us. So we struck up a good relationship with Bev, and she decided that she would start her rehabilitated hedgehogs. We started releasing those hedgehogs, and I think we released close to 100 hedgehogs.
Oh wow! On your land?
On the land,
on the
and
land.
they've actually, well, from what I can see, they've done a really good job at
Okay.
control. Any other methods?
Yeah, I suppose it is amazing, like, to see. We don't use any slug pellets, and sometimes some crops do take a bit of like damage, but nothing major. Like even like we had some chard last year, could definitely still have been sold. It was fine for, you know, for a market or anything. We do use a little bit of seaweed meal around the base of plants sometimes, just at that early stage when they're getting settled in. The slugs don't seem to like to cross that because the salt and it's quite coarse. But I think, yeah, just healthy plants is a big one. If we really make sure the plants aren't pot bound or anything like that, or, you know, that they transition well, that they're properly hardened off, that there's no shock to them when they're going on the ground outside. And then that we water them in well, and yeah, just if the plants are healthy, really smooth transition from the tunnel to the ground, I think that seems to make a big difference.
So slugs in particular attack weaker plants.
Yeah, and as well with the soil, we had some broad beans this year that are having a bit of slug damage, and again, I think it was compacted soil, so we just went along with a broad fork and loosened the soil a bit and just top dressed it with a bit of compost, and that seemed to help a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Flo McLair says here, the Gaia Foundation are running an intermediate seed saving course, first one in Ireland this year as we start to build up a network, but we'll be following it up with another one next year, starting in October as well. So I suppose if people are interested in that course as well, to look up the Gaia Foundation, GAIA, and see what the seed saving course is about. Sorry, apologies to anyone who joined us at 8:30. Obviously, there was a typo somewhere that this started at 8:30. It actually started at 8 o'clock. Sorry about that. Our Q&As are always 8 o'clock. The other thing that you guys are involved in, you mentioned, you kind of touched on it briefly, is research. Is that a big area, a big ongoing thing for Irish Seed Savers, to bring in researchers, to carry on researching, to, you know, is it a large part of the remit?
Yeah, it is. Like, we work for the apples. We have 3 for it to be a national collection. We have to have 3 sort of separate collections around the country. So we have one full collection here. There's a collection at UCD, and there's a collection at the Agri-Food and Bioscience Institute in Loughgall. And between these 3 organizations, we work together, like, to do kind of continued research in all that aspects of the fruit trees. So yeah, as I said, we're still, it's ongoing and it's constant. The varieties are constantly adapting, and we're finding there's just more and more interest in plant breeding now, and the prospect of changing climate. There's just I suppose the genetic resource that we have is becoming more and more important. And with that, research is becoming more and more important around that.
And there was something you mentioned earlier as well, that Irish Seed Savers is one of the biggest employers in East Clare, you know, with its 26 people. But you had mentioned to me before, between workshops, you know, you need to get caterers in, and, you know, there's a huge ripple effect to people coming into the area for educational reasons or whatever. I mean, that's quite inspirational for other areas, that, you know, you've managed to keep your local post office open and stuff like that. So it's nice to hear that it is kind of creating such a big employment base in an area. Why did Anita, the founder, originally choose East Clare?
That's a good question. I'm not actually quite sure. I'd assume it's to do with music, because he's a musician, and there's a lot of great music. I can only imagine that was one of the main reasons, I suppose.
Yeah.
So the kids went to the Steiner School as well. That was another big draw for a lot of families around here, was the Steiner School, and they wanted to send their kids there. But
yeah, no, it's interesting. Well, guys, thanks very much. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that you haven't mentioned?
yeah, I don't know.
No. Oh, good. Well, listen, thanks very much for joining us tonight. It's it's great to hear the work that you're doing. Keep it up. It's really important. Obviously on a national level and internationally, to be able to kind of showcase what we have here and to keep that strong. And I think what you've said before as well about encouraging other people to seed save and stuff, there's a future in that as well, in the kind of current situations that are going on in the world. But thanks very much. If anyone missed any of this session, it will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Really sorry for anyone who did miss half it due to a typo somewhere. Also, if you'd like to contact either Damien or Jeremy, they work at the Irish Seed Savers. They have a website. It's called irishseedsavers.com, is it?
.ie.
Yeah. And so they can be contacted, or the workshops that are available and the education that's available. It's also an open visitor centre, I believe. It's got a cafe and stuff, so people can drop in, can't they, to the Irish Seed Savers Association when they're in the Scariff area. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, the cafe is just open at the weekends for the workshops currently. But yeah, it is open to visitors. I think it's 10 until 4 from Tuesday to Saturday.
Great, excellent. So if anyone's in the area, do feel free to drop in and see the great work that they're doing.
And keep an eye out for the workshops. Just keep an eye on the website. There's some fantastic workshops coming up.
So what kind of, to give us an example of what types of workshops, what would you be doing?
Well, I suppose one of the ones that's coming up for us would be the orchard, the apple tasting tours. Now that's really important if people are thinking about planting an orchard. Like, it's really good to just come on site and see the character of the trees, see what they like the taste of. I could try and describe.
And then can you take these and can you take some home with, can you take and plant after?
Well, the idea is that, like, people come and they get an idea of what they like the taste of, what they like the look of, and then they know what varieties they'd be interested in sourcing and planting it for themselves.
Yeah, it's a great idea. So presumably that is in August, September.
September, yeah.
September more.
And recently we've been doing grafting workshops as well. We're doing a knots course for the a 10-week knots course for anyone who's interested in. It's already started, but hopefully we'll be doing it again. Anyone who's interested in orchard and nursery management.
Great, excellent. And on your side, Damien, are you doing courses as well, or?
No, not giving any of them or anything like that. But
okay.
There are lots of courses, like from everything from natural cosmetics to orchard management to scything to herbal medicine. Yeah, there's a good variety.
Mushroom foraging.
Yeah.
Great, there's a wide variety of that.
Jan is in charge of manages the workshop side of things, and over the years she's built up some good relationships with some good tutors. So most tutors are return kind of facilitators, and they're all very good.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, thanks guys very much. Thanks for taking the time this evening, and I'm sure you've both had a busy day. So thanks for taking the time this evening to join us and to educate us on what you do. And it's been very inspirational. For anyone that wants to join our Q&A sessions, we have sheep farmer Colin Gavin from County Mayo in 2 weeks' time, 8 p.m. So do register through our website. And meanwhile, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everyone else for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bridget.
Nice. Bye-bye.